Awesome. So, as I was saying, the name of the game is the Big Questions podcast. And the biggest question of all, the question I ask all of my guests, is the question I'm about to ask you now. Who are you?
Thank you, Ollie. So I'm Wilhelm P. Ostir. I am actually assigned author with All Genders Press, part of Castle Carrington Transgender Publishing. I am a cisgender gay male, social scientist by training, also right on the side, father of a 15-year-old, community leader, and actually an advocate for individuals with disabilities, particularly dyslexia.
Wow, that's a very good, concise answer. I can tell you had some time to think about it. I didn't catch you off guard. So let's talk about, well, I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but let's start with how you came to meet Margot and sort of the background to your book, what led you to want to write this book and all that fun stuff. So how did that get going for you?
So I started the book series development back in 2012. I was a graduate student at the time in the education field and have always had a love of fantasy literature, but there's been a few challenges. One, I hated reading, and that was because I was dyslexia. So books were not always the friendliest. They were actually the enemy. And then as we pick up literature, it's always the hero's story. It's always the male as the main character. And I wanted my daughter to have something that was different. So heroine at the heart of the story, Rose, the character, surrounded by her two sidekicks, brothers. And it is the journey that they have to go through, the coming of age story, romance, dating, everything teenagers go through. Met Margot through some of the other authors of Transgender Press. I was at the time reaching out to different publishers, trying to get the book out there, and kept getting the same exact response back, which is, we do not publish LGBTQ literature, or we will publish it, but you have to take all of your LGBTQ identifying characters out.
Wow.
Margot was the first one that said, send it, let me look at it. Looked at it, she's like, yeah, we can publish it, let's go. And now 2 books later, we're heading into the third one with hopefully publication late November, beginning of December.
Nice. Wow, that's good. Congratulations. I mean, publishing any book, let alone 2 books, is quite the feat. So glad that you were able to find a home for it. Now, why do you think these other publishing houses were so concerned about the gender identity of certain characters in a book of fantasy fiction?
There is no easy answer to that. That the answers could be politically charged, depending on which way we answer that. The very mild version is that there are still certain topics that are scary for mainstream publishers. Margot and I have talked about that much of the LGBTQ literature out there is this raunchy, like, sex stuff for LGBT literature, and it doesn't catch what LGBT culture can be. That same-sex relationships can be more than just these raunchy sex scenes that are written into books. And so the publishers are going with, oh, let's just publish what people want to read, which is this weird, distorted perception of the LGBT community.
What they think people want to read, right? Because they don't actually know if there's a market for these other types of stories that you're describing, because they don't take chances on them, because they assume that people don't want to read it.
Correct. And we also see, and Margot and I have talked, and I've kind of said, my frustration is you look at the background of a lot of these other authors that are writing LGBTQ literature, and it's coming from a cis heterosexual artist, writer, who is not immersed in the culture, is not immersed in LGBT community, and doesn't even really carry ally status. They're just, oh, you know what? Here's a fancy topic to write about. Let's write about this. And so it creates this, in some ways, misconception of what LGBTQ culture is about. And that's why Rise of the Magic 3, I talk about some of those really heavy issues in LGBT culture coming out. Same-sex parenting, a lot of other things, but have done it in a very subtle way through kind of this fantasy storyline.
Yeah. It's so crazy to me that the people who are writing in this sphere are not members of the community. I was not aware of that. So that would be like me trying to write a book about the Black experience in America or something, right? Like, what is it like to be a Black man in America? I'm going to write a book about that. It's basically the same thing that's going on in the LGBTQ community, or the literary world, at least.
And so for transgender press, Castle Carrington, All Genders, the whole group that's under the publishing company and all of its offshoots, we are actually writers of the community. We identify as one of the letters within the community. We are writing from real world experience, lived experience at that. And so it's interesting to me that it's almost like we've got this divide in the LGBT literary world.
Yeah, interesting. And it's so important that there are genuine voices from those communities being heard, because otherwise you're going to get this, which you're describing very well, this kind of distorted image of what it entails, because the people who are giving you the image are not even part of the community. Wow, we're living in a crazy world, aren't we, Wilhelm?
Yes.
Yeah, everything's backwards and upside down and topsy-turvy. But so yeah, I like that. That's a really good, it's a really good sort of motivation. You were into this genre, you saw that there was a lack of representation, and you decided that you were going to do something about it. And then on top of that, you have a teenager yourself, so you're trying to write something that's going to appeal to that audience for obvious reasons.
And also not just appeal to the younger audience, but every time we see a female character, they are what? The sidekick? They
Typically.
Are the damsel
love interest.
The love interest. They're the damsel in distress. They normally don't fight. It's normally the fighting's left to the men.
Yep.
And with Rose, you've got this character who is coming of age, 16 in the first book, a witch, and can fight with magic, can fight with weapons, and pretty much doesn't need anyone to tell her what to do because she's got it.
Yeah. She starts off in the first book already quite powerful, if I recall. I mean, she's already got quite a bit of power there. So, and that's another kind of subversion of the trope. Usually the hero in the book starts off pretty weak and ignorant and doesn't know what's happening, and throughout the story starts to develop their power, whereas in your book she already comes into it with some power behind her, which again, it's nice to see the sort of stereotypes subverted or amended in creative ways. I mean, because there's only so many stories you can tell before you have to start to repeat, right? So how do you repeat without being unoriginal, which is kind of the massive task that all authors are faced with. And it seems like you've done a good job of navigating that.
And to build on that part that you were saying, where the character comes into their power, she has already got her power, but she is coming into the journey.
Yeah.
So it was like, why not start it there?
Yeah.
And as she goes, as her brothers progress, as the other characters are coming in, as the reader will find out what that journey looks like and how they become more powerful in the process. And then meet some of the quirky sides of the story that is ultimately playing out.
Yeah. So you mentioned liking the literary genre. What were some of your favorites or some of your inspirations for this series that you're writing now?
Of course, the classics, J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, J.K. Rowling's, and that. And just really looking at the way they've done things. And that, all views aside about certain authors and their comments, that's separate from the work that they've done.
Oh, interesting.
And those are really the pivotal pieces. And that I was fortunate in undergraduate to take British children's literature. Which British children's literature is really where we see the boarding school genre come from, this world of fantasy and almost science fiction come from. And so it's very fascinating to see and be able to write in that genre and kind of pull from some of the great ones.
Yeah, and exactly, right. Being inspired by these classics, but not repeating exactly what they did, taking some of the ideas and subverting them, which I love when people do that.
And also building on mythology, building on folktale. We hear so many times the story of the great pantheon of the Greek gods. We hear about all of these other folklores and mythologies, but we don't really have stories that focus really on just one or talks about them but incorporates them in more of a global sense. Because we're dealing with Merlin, we're dealing with King Arthur and Arthurian legend in the book, but then you're also seeing a Greek goddess come in and play a very powerful role. You're seeing mystical creatures from all over the world coming in. So it's building on creating an all-encompassing world that's not just based in one culture or one set of gods or goddesses or one set of folk tales.
Another great move on your part, because growing up reading fantasy, David Eddings, Tolkien, all these different authors, it's very much inspired by medieval Europe, and that's the image that you get with knights and dragons, Arthurian, as you mentioned. And I always thought, wouldn't it be cool if somebody wrote a fantasy book that was inspired by like Sumerian culture and mythology, right? Instead of having these white guys on horseback, you've got brown protagonists that are in a Middle Eastern setting. You can still have magic and all these different things, but how would that entire story feel being inspired by a totally different set of mythos, right? And so you're doing that by incorporating all of these different myths. You're not just sticking to like the sort of Western European sort of feel to it, even though that's where it starts with Arthurian and Merlin. You're incorporating all these different myths and being, I guess, inclusive in more than one way.
Well, also really building on high fantasy. High fantasy is that genre of creating an alternate world. So you've got mainstream like world Earth, and then you've got kind of like this alternate almost. And the story kind of goes through that genre of high fantasy, because in book one we are in a different realm, we're in a different world, and it's the characters navigating magic between the two worlds. And then throughout the rest of the series, there is time travel. There is jumping through different countries. There's jumping through different realms and dealing with one character traveling through different realms, traveling throughout time, and understanding how that influences the storyline.
There's a lot. Time travel is usually associated with science fiction, and this is fantasy. But I guess the two genres often do blend together, and so it's. But I don't think I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen time travel in fantasy before, so that might be the first for me. So another kudos to you for blending them together.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. You said something a few minutes ago that I wanted to go back to, slightly off topic, not completely, but you mentioned separating the artist from the art, and this is a favorite subject for me because I have these conversations all the time. And one of my favorite examples is like Mel Gibson. You know what he's done and said in his personal life, but then you watch Braveheart, and it's like, Braveheart's a great movie, so it's like, I see that you are able to, or at least you're willing to separate the artist from the art. And I was wondering if you wanted to elaborate on that a little bit more, because I don't think that that's common these days. It seems like people are willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
So we live in a time of mass social media, and many times we're under that microscope. Anything we say, anything we do, you're under that scope. And there can be times where an artist, an author, an actor, actress can say something that can be offensive to particular communities, but their work stands separate of that. And so we have to remember that we're all human. We all can make mistakes. A lot of it goes back to people have to learn and they have to grow.
Yeah, no, that's a good approach to it. And it's a good way to justify it too, again, from more of a compassionate point of view, instead of thinking, well, if I support the art, I'm supporting the artist, and I don't want to support this person because I don't agree with their views.
Yeah.
You're willing to say, listen, we all make mistakes. We all probably all hold views that somebody out there is going to think are ignorant or, offensive. Like I'm sure you do. I'm sure I do. If you ask the right people, they're going to be offended by it. So yeah, no, that's an interesting point of view. I appreciate that.
I love a particular fantasy series. It was one of the series that got me back into reading, that didn't make reading so scary.
Yep.
The author did an amazing job with the series. Has the author said certain comments, though, that are offensive? Yes. Does that represent the work they've done? No.
Yeah. Mind if I ask who that is? Okay, we'll keep it off the record.
Off record, not saying anything.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, and again, having read, things like, George Martin, Game of Thrones and stuff like that, I don't know him personally, but the mind that produces some of these stories, there has got to be something wrong in there somewhere along the way. So it's not surprising that some of these authors will say things or do things that might be offensive to some. And, but yeah, it's good. I agree. I think it's important to separate the artist from the art. And there's so many opportunities now for this discussion, because as we, there's an artist recently that went to prison for doing some horrible things, unforgivable things, and yet their 30-year discography is still there, and it's still full of classic hits that people of all walks of life really enjoy. So it's like, how do you navigate that? And I think your method is probably the most effective. It's the best of both worlds. You don't have to condone what they said and did, but you also don't have to absolve or get rid of the works. You can still enjoy the works, and you know what I mean? You navigate that pretty effectively. So yeah. So House of Phoenix Chronicles, Volume 1, Rise of the Magical 3. So that's your first book. And then the second one, I don't think I have it on hand, but you do. Excellent. Okay.
Secrets Echoed. Yes.
Nice. Yeah. And so you said the third book is coming in probably November, end of this year?
End of this year. So the Ignatius 7 will be the third book in the series. We've been very, I wouldn't want to say aggressive, but we've been very productive in getting a set of the series out.
Yep.
There are 5 books in the House of Phoenix Chronicles.
Okay.
We've put book 1, Rise of the Magic 3, out August 2021. Secrets Echoed just literally dropped a few weeks ago. We've got Ignatius 7 coming in November, and then Things Are Not What They Seem will be next year, with book 5 coming the following year.
Wow. Ambitious plans. Was it always 5 books from the beginning when you started to kind of imagine and draw this thing out?
That's a tricky question. So book 3, The 7 Ignatiuses, was actually the original book 1 of the series.
Okay, interesting.
When I developed the book, I kind of developed it mid-story. Went back, developed book 1s and 2. Kind of, let's step back a little bit, because we've got the character of book 3, but how do we get to this character?
I see.
What's the back history of this character? In order to tell the back history, we need to go back to book 1, the new book 1, Rise of the Magic 3, and then Secret Echo, kind of carrying the story to where book 3 is.
Gotcha.
Setting book 3 as kind of that middle foundation now, and then moving into 4 and 5.
Okay, interesting.
So by book 3, we are introduced to the entire lineup of the world of characters.
Yeah.
So book 4 and book 5, we're not seeing any of the new characters. Everyone's established at that point.
Right.
Margot and I have talked, because there are a few characters that are absolutely loved at this point, about some spin-off series. As I've told Margot, you keep publishing, I'll keep writing, we'll just keep going.
Good arrangement.
There is development of a new trilogy that will be part of the House of Phoenix Chronicles, but it will be the same group of characters, just much later.
Right. Okay. So when you started writing what is now book 3, did you get to a point where you realized, or you felt like, you know what, we can't start here, I have to go back and fill in the backstory? Okay. And what are some of the things that caused you to realize that as you were going through book 3? If you don't mind me asking. I love the creative process, as you know, so I'd like to discuss this with other authors.
So book 3 focuses around Noel, a character who you get a glimpse of at the end of book 1.
Okay.
Who Rose, one of the main characters, interacts with. And Noel is a very powerful character, but comments that he is even scared of Rose.
Oh, wow.
In book 1. So book 3, we're focused on Noel and the journey of Noel and his interactions with the Magical 3, the Ignatius family, all of the different houses of the world that is created. And book 3, I'm sitting there and I'm going, well, wait a minute, how did we get here? Like, here's Noel, here's this pivotal character. We've got Rose, we've got Ethan, we've got Oliver. How do we get this all to mesh?
Right.
And at some point, I'm going to have to go back and start with kind of that initial part of who is Rose, who is Ethan, who is Oliver.
Right.
Starting with Noel, fine, but we got to go back a little bit further. So it was jumping back to who's Rose, who's Ethan, who's Oliver, and what does their story look like to be able to get us to where Noel
is. Oh, I see. Interesting. Yeah, I've had that happen to me before as well, where it's like, oh, I kind of have to go back a bit further, because you can introduce a lot of backstory through dialogue and through flashbacks or whatever, but that you can't do that too much. And if you've got 2 books worth of backstory, you can't really sprinkle that in. you have to go back. So yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Backstory.
Do we really want to be putting out a huge first volume that's probably double that?
So, and as a first-time author, I mean, it's tricky, right? You, and from research I've done, they say that, 120,000 words is probably the biggest novel you want to go with. And if you're a first timer, 80,000 is probably better. But again, there's first time novelists that have written bricks and they've worked out, Robert Jordan, George Martin, all these fantasy authors. It's like the first book is like 800 pages. So there's exceptions to every rule, but I think sort of standard practice is to keep it a little bit shorter for your first one. So,
and as Margot and I talked, for me, it was more comfortable to keep it right around 300, 350 than trying to do a massive text, because at some point that reader is going to start to disconnect.
Yep. Fair enough. Yeah. I had a question for you and I slipped out. Dang it. Oh, yes. I was going to talk to you about magic, because that's another very sort of key topic in fantasy books. Did you do anything special, or did you come up with did you spend a lot of time developing your magic system? Because, most people have there's rules and how does magic work and what are the different, schools of magic and all that stuff. So was that something that you spent quite a bit of time on? Because I hear people do most of the time, but I don't know.
So, and that's actually a great question. And I think that goes back to what you mentioned earlier about time travel being science fiction. Magic in fantasy has always been about the wand and, okay, I've got the wand and the casting and that. And yes, that's there. But there's also characters who can use magic without the wand. They can use staves. They can use the swords that are imbued with magic. So it's about magic being in everything around them. It's not just about here's the spell book and go.
Right.
So it was really looking at what does that look like, using the grimoires, using staffs. The characters switch between the staff and the wand, depending on the intensity of the magic and the power that they need to put out. It's going to be one or the other. The staff also in the story plays more of also a weapon. So casting, but I'm also striking something with it to be able to defend myself. It's used for a lot of the bigger, elaborate spells. Rusty spinning the staff and slamming it on the ground, causing shock waves. You can't do with a wand.
Right.
And that. So it's really doing that. But then looking at magic as this way of stopping things, bringing it to a halt. Well, in order to do that, what do you have to mess with? Time.
Yeah.
And so looking at a few key characters holding that magic, a very unique magical system of we can control time. We can turn it back. We can mess with it. We can break it and we can refix it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it was developing that, and it was going to also figuring out terms of what is magical, what is non-magical. So arcane, magical, mundane, non-magical. Then it was also looking at, well, okay, wait a minute. How do we classify mystical characters? How do we classify those that are almost immortal in the story? So looking at that, and spells people make up, spells do this, spells do that. I said, take a very basic word and go back to the original Latin for it. So taking a series of words for spells, basic things, and then looking it up and doing kind of a Latin, hey, here's the spell in Latin, here it is in English, and going from there.
No, that's cool. And why did you pick Latin as the sort of magic language?
Latin is kind of that root of all languages. I mean, how many different languages come off of Latin? And so it was trying to incorporate as much into the world as, hey, here's kind of the traditional roots. It's Latin. Latin is the base of almost all languages, or good majority of the world languages, and going from there.
Oh, that's cool. I like that, using a different language to denote the magic and the spells and stuff. That's a good way to do it as well. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I mean, it's exciting to see people trying their hand at something new, not new, but putting a new twist on old familiar classics. And so yeah, when I first heard about this and started reading one of the first drafts, I was pretty excited, and told Margot all about it, and shared some of my views with her, and thought, yeah, it's great. And not just the representation piece, but just, again, that you're mixing a lot of different things together in a way that's it works. It's not like, you're not just like slamming things in. It's like, no, you're weaving them together in a way that's it makes sense, and it makes for interesting and original literature, which I appreciate.
It's also, in some sense, I poke fun of certain things. There's this concept of the dwarf. Well, dwarf in fantasy literature is what? Normally obsessed with gold.
Yeah.
Like
short, hairy. Yeah.
And why can't dwarfs be obsessed with something else? The books in the library. They protect the grimoires. They protect the ancient knowledge of the world of magic. Why can't wizards and witches have cell phones and computers and that? Whenever we see fantasy, there's almost this disconnect of modern technology.
Yeah, very true.
Well, why can't you have a non-magical mundane working with an arcane and saying, here's my tech, you've got magic, how do we bring it together?
Yeah. No, that's cool too. Yeah, I was just thinking like Harry Potter whipping out his cell phone, right? Like, you don't see that. But it's like, they're in modern times. You'd think that there would be some technology at Hogwarts or whatever, but no, they're just like, no, we're going old school.
And really, in book 3, we're following the character of Noel and another character, Ambrose. And Ambrose is in college. And he's going to this mixed college of mundane, non-magical, and arcane, mystical, and magical, all in this university. He works for the coffee shop, modern technology. They poke fun of the technology, like it's bound together. The espresso machine is bound together with baling wire and duct tape at this point. Someone needs to just cast a magic spell on it so it works right.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of bringing modern times into a fantasy world.
Yeah.
Because we think fantasy, we think, okay, separate world, separate this and that. And what makes Rose, Ethan, and Oliver, the 3 main characters, so unique is that they grew up with technology. They grew up with both technology and magic. So there are times where Rose will comment, never should have given my father a cell phone.
Yeah.
Because he can't figure it out. And that.
So has that been a theme in your life by any chance? This idea of navigating 2 worlds at once, of having a foot in each world, or being of 2 worlds? Is that something that, and sorry to get personal, I know we're talking about your book, but I always like to get to know people as well. So is that something that's run through your life by any chance?
So for me, I grew up with a disability, with dyslexia. Pretty much people would tell me, you're never going to make it. Why try? Just give up. You can't read. And it was really having to put on that front of academically I can perform, but I have that struggle. So yes. And then the other one is also being part of the LGBT community and having to walk at times between the 2 worlds and how you present. And again, going back to that, this is what media sees, but this is actually what our lived experience is.
Yeah.
So yes, walking between the worlds and having to put on at times this image that society expects.
Yeah. And that's such a common struggle for people regardless of their sort of background, whether it's ethnic or, gender identity, is I think a lot of people are made to feel like they can't be themselves, and they have to, navigate this kind of world as a fake persona,
Yeah.
and balancing this person that I am out here versus the person that I really am inside. And so that theme of being of two worlds, those three characters that have been in both and have been exposed to both, there's great power in that, right? Because they're probably comfortable in both, whereas some people, they're switching back and forth. They're not always in both. So yeah, no, that's very interesting. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't know anybody who hasn't felt that way at some point.
Yeah. So my background is I'm a trained educator. I'm also a trained social scientist. The work that I do outside of my writing, I'm literally working with youth and teens every day on literally you're walking between these worlds. People look at you and they're like, oh, you're good, not realizing they have a disability of some sort. Or they have a certain way that they identify, or whatever it may be. And so the book, yes, focuses on the heroine, focuses on the hero's journey. It's also kind of that validation that you can be who you are and not have to hide it. And that society can be accepting.
Yeah. Well, and that is the true hero's journey. Right? Going within yourself into that cave you fear to enter, discovering who and what you truly are, warts and all, and then re-emerging as a new version of yourself that integrates all the different pieces. And so it's brilliant to see the sort of symmetry between your life experience plus your professional experience, seeing this, and then you projecting this or creating this fantasy series that really is rooted in that whole idea. So, I mean, again, art imitating life, life imitating art. It's beautiful stuff.
And also with the storyline, it was about taking a classic, the Merlin story, and turning it upside down on its head.
Yeah.
And doing some things that were unexpected.
Yeah. And you've done that in this book, the first book, at the very least, you've done that multiple times. You're very good at subverting the tropes and the sort of stereotypes. And like you said, flipping them on their head, which you have to, right? I mean, there's so much fantasy literature out there, whether it's young adult or whatever. And, having read a lot of it, you see the same old tired, archetype coming through. So if you're going to lean into those, you have to do something different, which again, kudos to you, because you've definitely done that.
And it's also about taking a classic story and twisting it to create a new villain, to also create a new set of heroes, to kind of make things topsy-turvy. And that, because we have this persona of what Merlin is like.
Yeah.
How was that persona created, though? Through media, through certain writings and that. And so taking a classic character like Merlin and turning it upside down the way I did. And I've gotten feedback from people and they're like, what in the world?
Yeah, that's and good.
Without revealing too much about
no spoilers.
But a lot of people have said, what in the world did you do with Merlin? And that. So it's telling people it's also okay to take some of those stories and turn them upside down.
Yeah, make them your own.
Yeah. But also the way we look at the world, we need to change that at times.
Yeah.
And I did that with Merlin and Morgana.
Yeah.
Two very classic characters of Arthurian legend, completely turned upside down.
Yeah. Well, and that's it's a good sign that you've gotten that feedback from some of your readers, that they're maybe even a little bit upset or surprised. It's like, that means you're doing a good job. I always think of, again, the first book by George Martin, the Game of Thrones there, where, even watching the show with people who hadn't read the books, when the main character dies in that first book, that was the first time I'd ever seen that done in a fantasy series, where it was like, and you were invested in that character, and it was like, oh, he just killed him. It just takes them out. Like, what's going to happen next? Makes you can't not read anymore. You got to keep reading the series when stuff like that happens. And I imagine it's the same with your series, when you expect something from a character because you've been, like you said, conditioned through popular culture, media, to think of a character a certain way. And then you flip that character completely around and you subvert the reader's expectations. Well done.
So my best friend was reading the first book to his sons, and his one son said to him, "Dad, that's not Merlin." And he starts laughing and he's like, "You're used to one vision of Merlin.
Yeah.
This is a different telling of Merlin."
Yeah, exactly. This is a different version. Not the Merlin you're used to.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Do you have any plans I know you've got extensive plans to keep writing in this world that you've created here. And do you have other ideas percolating that are outside of this universe, that are completely different characters, different settings? Or are you just purely focused on this universe, this world that you've created here?
I have other ideas. I have other things kind of drafted and sitting aside. Mm-hmm. Margot knows that this series, there are hundreds of chapters developed for, and it was just a lot of taking time, sitting down and just writing out thoughts. And here's a chapter here, here's a chapter here, here's part of this interaction. So I've got enough material to kind of keep this series going, but also I've looked at some other things.
Yeah.
Working with All Genders Press, Transgendered Press, Castle Carrington has been amazing. I was the first author signed to All Genders, mm-hmm. Not the first author signed to the company, but to the All Genders side of the publishing company. So I plan to stay. As long as Margot keeps publishing, I've told her I'm on board. Looking at other things down the road, that would be fine. Eventually, I know I'll probably need a break from House of Phoenix.
Yeah.
There will be other things that I could look at. So,
well, you started in 2012 and you haven't needed a break yet. So maybe you won't. Maybe this is just your passion and you're fully invested, and it's, it just jazzes you up, right? I mean, if it makes you happy and you're inspired, then why change it, right?
Oh yeah. And starting back in 2012, had taken some time off from writing, kind of let the series sit for a while, revisited it, then said, I'd like to publish it, started that journey of reaching out to publishing houses, and one rejection after another, or the change this character. No, I'm not changing the characters.
It's like, I think you missed the whole point.
Yes.
I want to introduce these types of characters. That's why I write these books.
Yeah. I think probably one of the most heartbreaking one for me was within the main 6 characters, when I had gotten feedback of people aren't going to like this character and that character, and you need to change this. And I'm like, well, there goes the entire storyline.
Right.
So no, not changing.
Yeah.
I'll put it up on the shelf and I'll let it sit for a while, maybe revisit it, trying to publish it in a few years, but then was connected with Margot, and we're now on this journey of multiple books.
Yeah.
More on its way.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm glad you found Margot and All Genders Publishing, and I'm glad that you're inspired and that you're just going to keep pumping these out. That's great news. And obviously you enjoy writing, I hope.
Writing is that stress release for me.
Yeah. Oh, excellent.
Each person has their way of doing their stress release. They've had a long day. I sit down and I start writing. And
nice.
Changing things, and okay, how would this happen in the story? And
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. And do you write anything else? Like, do you write in a journal or anything like that? Or is it creative writing is your outlet and that's it?
Creative writing's my outlet. And it's
Yeah.
actually, it's interesting because I trained in the visual arts and photography and never thought I would do creative writing, and just developed the few characters back in 2012, started developing this world, and ended up, now I'm doing the creative side.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. It is therapeutic for sure. And even if you're not writing about, your day or your thoughts or anything like that, that stuff is coming through in
Yeah.
your fiction 100%, right? Whether you
And
know it or not.
yeah, and it's also nice because as an artist, my photography is actually featured on the front covers of the book.
Yeah.
So
Multitask.
book one, the amazing scene there is from Ireland. Book two, the castle is from Northern Ireland when I traveled abroad. Book four's cover has a magnificent waterfall that I had captured when I was living in California and visited Yosemite.
Nice.
So that my photography is woven into the cover too. So it's kind of another extension of my art.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to ask after you mentioned photography if this was your photo. That's very beautiful. Good for you. Wow. Well, I'm going to put a link to both of your books in the description of the video. And I would like to thank you because I love talking to other creatives about the creative process and about the ideas that inspire us and all that kind of stuff. So I appreciate the time to chat with you.
Not a problem. And thank you for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Before we go, is there anything that you'd like to tell the audience, either about the book or about maybe working with Margot or anything really? Parting words. I'll let you have the last one.
So parting words. So I'll jump in on the Margot side first. If you are a member of any part of the LGBTQIA, the whole acronym community, we have a publisher. We have a publisher that cares. Margot is an ally, not only to the trans community, but also to all the rest of LGBT. And that working with Castle Carrington, all genders, transgender press is amazing. And it's getting our work as artists out there, and we're not having to compromise our values. And that. As far as the series, there's still more to come. There's a lot more to come. Currently, book 3 is sitting in publishing queue with Margot, hence November, December coming out. Planning to roll the first 3 books, hardcover versions, into a box set.
Nice.
That's still to come. Book 4 and book 5 coming, and then the spinoffs. I mean, when I spoke with Margot a few months ago, we're looking at least 11 or 12 books.
Wow, that's an epic. Love it.
So,
awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And like I said, we'll definitely put links to your books and anything else that you want me to promote in the video description. If you have a personal website or anything like that you want me to drive people towards, just let me know, and I'll plug it all down there for you.
Building the personal site now.
Excellent.
And then I've already got Facebook and Instagram promoting the books.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll link to your socials as well. And yeah, hopefully feel free to share this with anybody, obviously, if you'd like. And yeah, we'll talk again. I can't wait to see what the future of this series holds.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, have a great rest of your day. Thanks a lot, Wilhelm.
Oh, thank you.